This is my grandma's house. And up there, that's my grandma's kitchen window. We're gonna go inside. And Hope Willert is gonna teach you how to live. This is the best pie crust that has ever been invented in the history of the world. So I'm gonna hand it over to her to teach us all what we have all been doing wrong. So please, take it away.
We begin with 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I have it measured in this bowl. I'm going to put it in a larger bowl to mix. And then you take vegetable shortening. It can be Crisco or any store brand, as long as it's of a nice consistency. I have tried many different kinds, and some work better than others, so then I kind of stick to certain brands.
Which?
Crisco is probably my favorite. So you take it and put it in a measuring cup. That's a 1 cup measuring cup, and as you can see, I have kind of mounded the shortening up, so it's just a little more than a cup. Then you take it with your tablespoon, and I just use my finger and put it in my flour. You can add 3/4 teaspoon salt, which I have measured there. Finish putting on the shortening. And once that is completed, then you can start mixing.
Those rubber scrapers are crucial for baking.
Yes. I like to try to get as much out of the cup as I can. Okay, now I use just a normal fork, dinner fork. Some people, there are pastry blenders that you can use, but I have found that I like the fork the best. And so I start out by just taking the side of the fork and cutting up each piece a little bit smaller before I actually start mixing. This is probably going to take at least 5 minutes to complete. And so then you just go in a circular motion with the bottom of your fork like this and mix the shortening into the flour.
Why do you love baking?
Well, I feel a little bit like an artist. It gives you a feeling of completion and just appreciation once you see the finished product. And also, if it not only looks good, but it tastes good as well, that makes you feel like you're successful. And I have just always enjoyed baking probably more than any other household duty. And I have found that I like making pies because it's kind of a lost art. There's not too many of the new generation that feel they have the time to put into actually making a pie with their own crust. There are other ways to make pies with crusts that are already prepared in the refrigerated cases at the grocery store, which are good crusts, but I just like to make my own, and then I can roll it out the way I want to.
There's never a bad word to be said about anything or anyone in Hope's kitchen.
I also like making other things, but
What's your favorite thing to bake? What's the most fun?
I like pies the best. I also like to make yeast rolls. Pecan rolls or sticky buns is kind of something that my family enjoys a lot. Okay, I don't know if it was 5 minutes. I really didn't time myself.
I've got it timed.
But this, as you can see, there's no big pieces of shortening in it. It's kind of this, like the cookbooks say, the size of peas. Well, some pieces are bigger than others, but it's ready now that we can add the water. And we take real cold water. If your water isn't cold, you might want to add an ice cube and then measure your water. My water, it tends to be cold from the tap, so I don't have to let it run too long. And I'm going to measure half a cup, and if that isn't quite enough, then we'll add a little bit more. And you just pour it all in at once, and then you take your fork and you mix it around. And once you've mixed it around, you look to see if there's any flour that is not moistened at the bottom. If there is, you might want to add just another tablespoon of water, which is what I'm going to do.
But it's better to start and have the dough be a little too thick, because you can't really thin it back out.
Well, I think most people have trouble with making their own pie crust because they don't add quite enough water to the dough.
Because they're worried about
They're
making it
worried
too
that
thin.
maybe it's going to be too thin, but flour will absorb lots of water. And with pie crust, if you don't put enough water in, it's not going to roll out nice for you.
Mm-hmm. Which is why people get their really thick pie crusts that are
Could
unbearable.
Well, some people don't realize just how thin they can roll the crust. They think that they have to roll it thick because they're afraid that maybe the filling is going to go through the crust. But it's amazing. You can have very thin crust and the filling stays intact. Then I just kind of take my spatula and push it down, and then I cut it into 4 pieces because this recipe is enough for two crust pies, 2 crust fruit pies. So I just kind of decide what 1/4 piece is. And over here I have my baking mat. I'm going to take some extra flour that I have here, and I'm just going to sprinkle it on the baking mat.
Actually, hold on.
Okay, I'm cutting it into 4 pieces so that it will be enough for two crust fruit pies. I'm going to take 1 piece out and lay it on my baking mat, which needs to be sprinkled lightly with a little bit of flour. And I'm going to take my rolling pin and roll over it to flour my rolling pin. Take my crust out. And mound it with your hands into a nice circle. You have to keep adding just a little bit of flour to keep your dough from sticking to the mat. And keep moving the flour around so it's not in clumps. As you can see, this is a real pliable dough, and if you put enough water in with your flour and shortening, you shouldn't have any cracks, and it should roll out easily. This is going to be big enough for a 9-inch pie shell. And as you can see, I'm rolling it quite thin. I use the foil disposable pie tins because so many times they are either sold or given to other people. That way they don't have to return the tin.
You like giving away your pies. Or selling them for $1,000 at auction. And no, that is not a joke for anybody who's watching this video. These pies have sold for $1,000 at auction. She laughs because she knows it's true.
The auction was to make money for our local library and our church, and people bid up our baked goods to give a donation. And we know that the items that are auctioned off aren't really worth that kind of money, but it's the idea that people are very generous in giving donations.
I am unfortunately going to press my grandmother out of her humility zone at this point and say, Grandma, whose pies sell for the most money?
Not good.
Well, and if you find that your crust doesn't quite fit the pie pan, you need just a little more crust, you just pick some off where there's extra, take a little water, just lightly put a little water there and add some crust to it.
So you want the overhang to cover the rim, maybe even a little bit over? Or
Well,
how
just,
far over?
Just to cover the rim.
Okay. Over is
because-
okay, but you don't want to show any metal.
No, you don't want to show any metal. And also,
And you want it pressed pretty
You don't-
tight against the pan.
you don't, yes, you want to get the air bubbles out so that it bakes well and there's room for all the fruit.
Alright, so that's how we lay down the pie crust.
For our filling, we're going to be using red raspberries, and I buy them in a 16-ounce frozen package. I thaw them out for 1.5 minutes. I take one cup of sugar and 2.5 tablespoons of minute tapioca. I mix the sugar and the tapioca together, and I have already combined it and added it to these red raspberries. As you can see, they're all thawed out now, and you want the tapioca to soak in the juices of the fruit for at least 15 minutes before you add it to your pie.
Now, why is the sugar added to the berries?
Well, the berries would be too sour without the sugar, and it helps to promote the juice.
And then why add the tapioca?
The tapioca is the thickener so that it is just the right consistency so that when you cut your pie, it doesn't run all over the plate.
If someone didn't have tapioca, how else could they do this?
They could also add 3 to 4 tablespoons of cornstarch to their sugar.
What's the disadvantage of doing that?
I do not like to use cornstarch as well, because sometimes the cornstarch mixture sinks to the bottom of your pie, and many of mine I don't bake right away. I put them in I refreeze them to be baked at a later date, and I just think the thickening is much more uniform with tapioca.
Is there any way to solve that problem with cornstarch so it doesn't sink?
You could thicken your berries in a pan on the stove.
The cornstarch?
With the cornstarch.
Okay.
And that would solve that problem.
So pre-bake the filling a little bit if you had to. Cool. And that's how to fill a pie.
At this point, we should turn on our oven to bake and set it at 400 degrees. And when it's ready, then we can put our pie into the oven. We have the filling in the crust. We're going to take a little bit of butter, approximately 2 teaspoons, and that just adds a little bit of flavor to the filling. And just lay it on there like that. Now I have rolled out the top crust, and in order for the filling to get air when it's cooking, you need to make some sort of a design or just little holes in the top of your crust.
Why is it important for the filling to get air?
It will come out the sides because when things start to cook, it needs air holes for it to bake properly.
Or you get a blown up pie.
Yes. So I have my usual design. I call it my wheat design. I just make 3 like that, and then I make holes with my fork and make it looks kind of like wheat or an oat grain. And that way it's allowing many air holes for the filling to cook properly. Then you fold the crust in half very gently. Pick it up. Before you do that, you take your fingers or a pastry brush and just go around the rim of the crust and add enough water. This will be the sealing of the crusts with the water. Then you take your crust and you place it on the top and carefully lift it over and adjust it the best you can, and start pushing down with both finger and index, thumb and index finger of both hands around the rim to seal the 2 crusts together. Then I take a knife and I cut around the bottom of the rim to get the excess crust off. I quickly go around the rim one more final trip before you can leave it just like that, or you can make a fluted edge, which is what I enjoy doing. So I'll show you quickly how to do that. You take your little finger and your index finger of your left hand and your thumb and go like that. And it makes a very nice pattern around the pie. If you don't care to do that, you can just take the tines of a fork and go around it, and that's perfectly all right too.
But this looks much nicer. Much more traditional.
Well, it's just my design that I like to use. Everybody probably has a certain design that they like best. Now, I take just a little bit of either water or milk. I'm just going to put a little water on here to make the sugar stick to the crust. And you take about a tablespoon of sugar. I don't always measure. I just kind of sprinkle a light coating of sugar on the top. If you want to use milk instead of water to make the sugar stick, it tends to make the crust brown in places.
And that, yeah.
Now it's ready for the oven,
All right.
and that concludes the pie making.